Good evening, East Africa, from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, on this 29th day of January 2016, second day of the African Union Heads of State Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. KTN Bottomline East Africa begins now. Top stories tonight. Africa wants out. The International Criminal Court dominates the African Union agenda in Addis Ababa. Somalia's first election, the country agrees on a bicameral parliament to be formed later this year. And faces of starvation, hunger bites in Ethiopia and South Sudan as the region experiences its worst drought. The African Union's Peace and Security Council, with heads of state leading the delegation, started its meeting in Addis Ababa this evening with a minute's silence in memory of Kenyan soldiers killed in El Ade, Somalia, a week ago. Earlier, the AU Executive Council unanimously adopted a legal report endorsing a mass walkout from the Rome Statute that set up the International Criminal Court. African states have often lamented that what they termed as being singled out by the ICC, that they say has ignored case deferral requests and used recanted evidence. Trix Engado begins our coverage tonight.
A massive walkout of the International Criminal Court membership by African member states may be witnessed if a proposal by the AU Executive Council Committee of Foreign Ministers from the continent reviewing membership and relations with the Rome Statute goes through. Chaired by Ethiopia's Foreign Affairs Minister Tedros Adhanom, the committee is reviewing a report by a legal team that evaluates Africa's decisions in relation to the ICC.
We are nobody. This is not about President Bashir. This is not about Vice President Ruto. This is about us. I never have seen that kind of humiliation.
Among grievances behind the proposals is the ICC's failure to consider African Union's request to defer cases against Sudan's head of state Omar al-Bashir and Kenya's Deputy President William Ruto. Aside from this, the committee is also looking to have the ongoing African Union Summit adopt the Assembly of States Parties reaffirmation that stops the court from using recanted evidence retroactively. According to Kenya's Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed, the ICC has shown blatant disregard for the Assembly of State Parties that reaffirmed the non-retroactivity of the rule during its 14th session held last year.
Africa feels left out. Africa feels not listened to, Africa feels not responded to, and also Africa feels that even this time round, the only reason that we were able to make the progress that we made was because we had an African president of the Assembly of State Parties who understood the African terrain.
African leaders have over the years complained that the continent was being singled out by the ICC despite atrocities being committed elsewhere in the world. Yes. Trix Engado, KTN News, Nairobi.
Keep it in your...
Now, as the African Union Summit takes place in Addis Ababa, African women take center stage with the theme advocating for their increased inclusion. However, on the ground, more needs to be done, even as the very numbers of female African presidents expected at the summit remain wanting. Out of 54 heads of state, only 3 are women. Nasketian's Mark Namwasa tells us women in Africa continue to bear the brunt of discrimination, disempowerment, and economic exclusion.
For the second year running, the African Union's theme is centered around women. This year's theme being 2016, the African Year of Human Rights, with a particular focus on the rights of women. Themes notwithstanding, some of the key challenges facing African women include economic exclusion, financial systems that promote discrimination, limited participation in political and public life, limited access to education, gender-based violence, harmful cultural practices, and exclusion of women from peace tables. In May 2013, the African Union unveiled the Agenda 2063 in Addis Ababa, and 2015 was declared a year of women's empowerment and development towards Africa's Agenda 2015. At this year's summit, there will be a paltry 3 female presidents against the total 54. A lot has been done to improve female participation in power, and Kenya, for instance, has taken after Rwanda in raising female representation with many challenges.
Women are encouraged to vie and be elected in. But it then provides a fallback position just in case we are not able to get enough numbers to get representation at a third in either of the houses.
Kenya's 1/3 gender rule in the new constitution, for instance, has been bolstered by the creation of political seats such as women representative positions. However, women have not matched their male counterparts in elective posts, with none of the 47 governors being female. A peek at Africa's parliamentary scorecard paints an image of a struggling but advancing continent. Rwanda leads the pack with the highest number of female parliamentarians, followed by South Africa, Namibia, Ethiopia, Burundi, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. Others fare even worse. Africa also continues to witness political upheavals in the recent past, with humanitarian crises plaguing nations such as Sudan, South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Central African Republic, and more recently, Burundi. More worrying is that women bear the brunt of the violence in the form of rape and displacement, as observed in the 59th sitting of the Commission on the Status of Women in New York in March 2015. And the AU summit might do just a little more to lighten these burdens borne by women who represent more than half of the 1.2 billion Africans alive. Mark Namaswa, KTN News.
The African heads of state will be debating withdrawal from the ICC as the trial of a former African president, Ivorian Laurent Gbagbo, continues at the same court. That trial has opened old wounds, and Ivorians are worried about a possible split in reaction across the West African state. We are working on that story. We shall be bringing it a little later on. Now, meanwhile, 2 international journalists have been freed by authorities in Burundi after pressure from France's Foreign Minister, Laurent Fabius, who had called for their immediate release. A British Phil Moore and French journalist Jean-Philippe Remy were arrested during a sweep for rebels in Flashpoint district of the capital Bujumbura on Friday. The government statement said that the 2 foreigners were arrested in the company of armed criminals. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has released satellite images which show 5 possible mass graves in Burundi at sites consistent with testimony by witnesses who accused security forces of killing dozens of people in December 2015. Witnesses told Amnesty International that graves were dug on the afternoon of December 11th, and before and after images and video footage show disturbed earth at 5 sites in the Buringa area on the edge of the capital Bujumbura. The United Nations said it is also analyzing satellite images to investigate witness reports of at least 9 mass graves in and around the capital, including one in a military camp containing more than 100 bodies, allegedly, in total. African states are trying to push Nkurunziza to accept peacekeeping troops at a summit this week to prevent Burundi sliding back into ethnic conflict. But there is little hope that he will agree. The UN Security Council traveled to Burundi last week. The United Nations estimates the death toll at 439, but says it could be higher. More than 240,000 people have fled abroad, and the country's economy is in crisis. Somalia has agreed on a model for an electoral process that will see the country form a bicameral federal parliament this year. Somalia's last held elections in 2012, the first since 1991, when warlords ousted President Mohamed Siad Barre, plunging the country into years of conflict.
The United Nations Special Representative for Somalia, Michael Keating, told the Security Council via video link that the government had agreed on a model for the electoral process to establish a new bicameral parliament in 2016. The model envisages a lower house of 275 members based on a current power-sharing formula between clans and an upper house of 54 members based on an equal representation of existing emerging and prospective federal states and an allocation of additional seats to breakaway regions of Somaliland and Puntland.
This morning, a decision was taken by the Somali cabinet on the electoral model to be used later this year. This is the culmination of almost 6 months' intense consultations. It may be a watershed moment, marking the growing political maturity of a federal Somalia.
In Somalia's 2012 elections, members of parliament were chosen by elders, and then those lawmakers chose Mahamoud as president. It was Somalia's first election since 1991, when warlords ousted President Mohamed Siad Barre, plunging the country into years of war and chaos. Somalia is slowly recovering from 2 decades of conflict. A military campaign has driven Islamist rebels out of major strongholds, and some refugees have begun returning home, but efforts to rebuild the state have stalled. African Union troops, now numbering about 22,000 from several African nations, have spent nearly a decade battling the Al-Shabaab insurgents. Al-Shabaab has in the past year staged multiple attacks against African Union bases in Somalia, part of a guerrilla warfare strategy to drive out foreign troops and impose its harsh version of Islamic law across the Horn of Africa nation. Kenyan troops, part of an African Union force in Somalia, AMISOM, took heavy losses when Al-Shabaab launched a dawn raid on the camp near the Kenyan border on January 15th.
I pay tribute to the bravery and dedication of AMISOM and its troops, and to the courage of the Somali people. Kenya has vowed not to be deterred by the attack against its soldiers. Equally, Somalis are neither cowed nor deflected from their goals by Al-Shabaab atrocities.
After the optimism that followed the 2012 election, many diplomats had hoped for a one-person, one-vote system in 2016, but progress has been dented by frequent attacks by Al-Shabaab militants, as well as political infighting and corruption. Lilian Odera, KTN News.